They thought they had won. They thought the ink on the paper was final. When Sarah walked into that mahogany-panelled room, wearing a thrift store coat and clutching a wet umbrella, her stepmother Victoria didn't just look at her with pity. She looked at her like she was the trash that needed to be taken out. They laughed when the lawyer read out that Sarah was to receive nothing but a box of old letters. But they didn't know that the old man, Arthur Harrington, had one final trick up his sleeve, a trick that wouldn't just change the will, it would rewrite history. You think you know how a will reading goes? You have no idea. Stick around, because the silence that followed the lawyer's next sentence was loud enough to shatter the family forever. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hammered against the earth, as if trying to wash away the sins of the city. For Sarah Harrington, standing outside the wrought-iron gates of the Blackwood estate, the rain felt like a warning. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag, her knuckles white. It had been 7 years. 7 years since she had been practically chased out of this house. 7 years since her father, Arthur Harrington, the titan of the Pacific Northwest shipping industry, had looked her in the eye and told her she was a disappointment. Now, he was dead. Heart failure. Sudden, massive, and final. Name? The security guard asked. He was new. He didn't recognize the girl who used to play hide-and-seek in the gatehouse. Sarah, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah Harrington. The guard looked down at his clipboard, frowning. I have a Victoria Harrington, a Chad Harrington, and I don't see a Sarah on the VIP list. Are you staff? The sting was immediate, familiar. I'm his daughter, she said, louder this time. Before the guard could respond, a sleek, black Mercedes Maybach rolled up to the gate. The window purred down, revealing a face that Sarah had seen in her nightmares for nearly a decade. Victoria Harrington, her stepmother. Victoria looked impeccable, even in mourning. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car, and her diamonds were tasteful but large enough to choke a horse. Beside her sat Chad, Sarah's half-brother, looking bored and scrolling through his phone. Well, well, Victoria said, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Look what the cat dragged in. Or should I say, what the storm washed up. Hello, Victoria, Sarah said, steeling herself. Let her in, Jenkins. Victoria waved a dismissive hand at the guard. She's here for the scraps. Let's not deprive her of the disappointment. The gate buzzed open. The Mercedes glided through, splashing muddy water onto Sarah's jeans. She took a deep breath, wiped the mud off her shin, and began the long walk up the driveway. The Harrington estate was a monument to excess. 20 bedrooms, a heated indoor pool, a garage full of vintage cars, and a staff of 15. Growing up, it had felt like a museum where Sarah was the clumsy visitor who might break something. After her mother died when Sarah was 10, and Arthur married Victoria a year later, the museum became a prison. When Sarah finally reached the heavy oak doors, she was soaked to the bone. The butler, Mr. Henderson, opened the door. His face softened when he saw her. Miss Sarah, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to ensure Victoria wasn't watching. I am so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Henderson. She smiled weakly. Is everyone in the library? Yes, miss. Mr. Blackwood, the attorney, has just arrived. You're just in time. Sarah walked into the foyer. The house smelled of lilies and old money. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Frizzy wet hair, a cheap parka, and tired eyes. She looked nothing like them. She looked like a stranger. Just get through this, she told herself. Hear them say, you get nothing. Sign the papers. And leave. Closure. That's all this is. She pushed open the double doors to the library. The room was warm, lit by a roaring fire. Victoria was seated in Arthur's favourite leather armchair, holding a crystal glass of scotch. Chad was leaning against the mantelpiece, looking at his Rolex. "You're late," Chad said without looking up. "Typical." "I walked," Sarah said, taking a seat in the furthest corner of the room on a hard wooden chair. "Of course you did," Victoria sighed, taking a sip of her drink. "Arthur always said you lacked drive. Even in attendance, you do the bare minimum." "Can we just start?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "Patience, darling," Victoria purred. "Mr. Blackwood is setting up. We want to make sure every penny is accounted for, don't we? After all, Arthur's empire is vast. It takes time to transfer a kingdom." At the head of the room, behind Arthur's massive mahogany desk, sat Mr. Percival Blackwood. He was a man of indeterminable age, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a suit that looked like it was tailored in 1950. He had been Arthur's personal attorney for 40 years. He knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically and perhaps literally. Mr. Blackwood didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look at Chad. His grey eyes were fixed on Sarah. He watched her with an intensity that made her squirm. "Are we all present?" Blackwood's voice was dry, like rustling paper. "Yes, Percival, get on with it," Victoria snapped. "We have a dinner reservation at Le Monde at 8. "Very well," Blackwood said. He opened a thick leather folder. "I am here to read the last will and testament of Arthur James Harrington, dated 6 months ago." Victoria froze. 6 months ago? That's impossible. Arthur's will was written in 2018. I was there. "He updated it," Blackwood said simply. "On his deathbed, practically." A heavy silence fell over the room. Victoria's knuckles turned white around her glass. Chad finally looked up from his phone. "Updated it?" Chad laughed nervously. "To what? Adjust for inflation?" "To adjust for clarity," Blackwood said. He cleared his throat and began to read. "To my devoted staff," Blackwood read. "I leave the sum of $50,000 each to be paid immediately, as thanks for their tolerance of my family." Victoria scoffed. "Ridiculous. Henderson doesn't need 50 grand. Blackwood ignored her. "To my various charities, the Seattle Dog Shelter, the Maritime Preservation Fund, and the orchestra, I leave $1 million each." Fine, tax write-offs," Chad muttered. "Get to the real stuff." "To my wife, Victoria." Victoria sat up straighter, smoothing her dress. She put on a mask of solemn grief, though her eyes were gleaming with greed. "To Victoria," Blackwood continued, "who stood by my side during the most public years of my life. I leave you the estate in the Hamptons, the penthouse in New York, and the contents of the safe deposit box at Chase Manhattan. Furthermore, I leave you a monthly stipend of $25,000 to maintain your lifestyle, provided you do not remarry." Victoria's face twisted. "A stipend? 25,000? That barely covers my wardrobe. And what about the company? The shipping lines? The liquidity?" "I am getting there," Blackwood said, his voice dropping an octave. "To my son, Chad." Chad stepped forward, grinning. "Here we go. The keys to the kingdom." "To Chad," Blackwood read, "who has shown a great aptitude for spending money he did not earn. I leave you the collection of vintage automobiles, including the 1964 Aston Martin and the vacation villa in Tuscany. However, regarding the family business, Harrington Shipping," Chad rubbed his hands together, "I leave you the position of Junior Vice President of Marketing, contingent on your showing up to work 5 days a week, sober, by 9 a.m. Failure to do so will result in immediate termination and forfeiture of your trust fund." "What?" Chad exploded. "Junior VP, I'm supposed to be CEO. I'm the heir. I'm the man of the house." "You are a 25-year-old child," Blackwood said, looking over his spectacles. Arthur's words, not mine. "This is an outrage." Victoria stood up, spilling her scotch. Arthur was out of his mind. Dementia. "We'll contest this. Who gets the company? Who gets the billions in assets? The controlling shares?" Blackwood turned his gaze slowly to the corner of the room, to the wet, shivering girl on the wooden chair. Victoria followed his gaze. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Her? You can't be serious. She runs a diner. She dropped out of art school. Arthur hated her." "To my daughter, Sarah," Blackwood read. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs. She didn't want the company. She didn't want the fight. She just wanted to know if her father ever loved her. "To Sarah," Blackwood's voice softened for the first time. "I leave the contents of the wooden chest at the foot of my bed. And I leave you. Nothing else." The silence in the room was absolute. Then Victoria started to laugh. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "The wooden chest?" Victoria cackled. "That old thing. It's full of junk, old maps, broken compasses, trash." Chad smirked, relaxing back against the mantel. "Wow, that's cold, even for Dad. Here's a box of trash, Sarah. Thanks for nothing." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was the confirmation. He really didn't care. He gave the cars to Chad, the houses to Victoria, and to her, a box of junk. "Is that it?" Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "That is the extent of the specific bequests," Blackwood said, closing the folder. "What about the controlling interest?" Victoria demanded. "The 51% of the stock? The billions in the Cayman accounts? You haven't assigned them to anyone." "Ah," Blackwood said. "There is an addendum." "Well, read it." "The addendum states," Blackwood said, "that the controlling interest of Harrington Shipping and the liquid assets, totaling approximately 4.2 billion hoosnas, shall be held in a blind trust." "A trust for who?" Victoria shrieked. "For the true heir," Blackwood said. "I am the true heir," Chad yelled. "The true heir," Blackwood continued, "will be determined by a test that began the moment you all walked into this room." Victoria and Chad looked around, confused. "Arthur knew you would all be disappointed," Blackwood said, standing up. "He knew you, Victoria, would only care about the allowance. He knew you, Chad, would only care about the title. And he knew you, Sarah." He looked at her. "He knew you would come even if you expected nothing." Blackwood walked over to the corner of the room where an old, battered wooden chest sat. He hadn't noticed it before. He picked it up and carried it to Sarah. "Open it, Miss Harrington." "It's just junk," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "Humour an old man," Blackwood said gently. Sarah undid the rusty latch. The lid creaked open. Inside, just as Victoria had said, were old nautical maps, a few dried flowers, and a tarnished brass compass. Victoria snorted. "Pathetic." "Look deeper," Blackwood said. Sarah moved the maps aside. Underneath lay a thick, leather-bound journal. She recognized the handwriting instantly. It was her mother's. "My mother's diary," Sarah gasped. "Keep looking," Blackwood urged. Beneath the diary was a single, sealed envelope. It was heavy. It was made of thick, cream-coloured paper, sealed with red wax. The wax bore the imprint of the Harrington family crest, but written on the front of the envelope, in Arthur's shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "For the one who stayed." "Give me that!" Chad lunged forward, trying to snatch the envelope from Sarah's hands. "Sit down, Mr. Harrington," Blackwood roared. His voice was shockingly loud for such a frail-looking man. "If you touch her, you forfeit the villa in Tuscany immediately." Arthur added a specialized, no-contest clause regarding physical aggression. Chad froze, his hand inches from Sarah's face. He snarled and backed away. It's probably just a sappy letter anyway. Sorry I was a bad dad, blah blah blah. Sarah's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the envelope. She looked up at the lawyer. What is this? Arthur had a philosophy, Blackwood said, pacing the room. He believed that wealth was a poison. He saw what it did to his friends. He saw what it did to his second marriage. He glanced pointedly at Victoria. He wanted to ensure that the bulk of his empire went to someone who possessed the one thing money cannot buy: integrity. Oh, spare me the philosophy lesson, Victoria spat. What is in the envelope? The final instruction, Blackwood said. Read it, Sarah, aloud. Sarah broke the wax seal. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. My dearest Sarah, she read, her voice trembling. If you are reading this, it means you accepted the wooden chest. It means you didn't storm out when you were given nothing. It means you value my memory more than my money. Sarah paused to take a breath. The room was deadly silent. I have made many mistakes. Marrying Victoria was one. Victoria gasped. How dare he? Spoiling Chad was another. Sarah continued reading. I created monsters, and I cannot leave my life's work to monsters. Therefore, the assets in the blind trust, the company, the billions, the entire legacy, are hereby bequeathed to the person who holds the golden compass. The compass? Chad looked at the box on Sarah's lap. That piece of junk brass? Sarah looked down into the box. She picked up the tarnished compass. It was heavy, covered in grime. It looked like something you'd find at a yard sale for $1. That's not gold, Victoria sneered. It's dirty brass. The old fool was senile. Turn it over, Blackwood said softly. Twist the back panel counterclockwise. Sarah gripped the compass. It was stiff with age. She twisted hard. Click. The back panel fell off. Underneath the grime, the metal wasn't brass. It shone with a deep, lustrous yellow hue, pure, solid gold. And nestled inside the hollow back of the compass was a small, intricate key and a micro-SD card. What is that? Chad whispered, his face draining of color. The key, Blackwood announced, opens the private vault at the Geneva Freeport. Inside that vault is the physical stock certificates for 51% of Harrington shipping. The micro-SD card contains the encryption keys to the offshore accounts. The realization hit the room like a bomb. Sarah held the future of the empire in her palm. The bochos of trash was worth $4 billion. Victoria's face went from angry to terrified in a split second. She realized that her $25,000 allowance and her house were now dependent on the goodwill of the stepdaughter she had tormented for years. Sarah, darling. Victoria's voice suddenly became syrupy sweet. She took a step forward, hands clasped. You know, we were just upset. Grief makes people say terrible things. You know I've always thought of you as a daughter. Don't, Sarah said, standing up. She clutched the compass to her chest. Just don't. We can run the company together, Chad said, putting on his best salesman smile. You don't know anything about shipping, Sarah. You need me. We're siblings. Blood is thicker than water. Blood? Sarah looked at him. You told the guard I wasn't on the list. A mistake, a clerical error, Chad pleaded. It wasn't an error, Blackwood interjected. I have the security logs. Victoria ordered your name removed this morning. Sarah looked at Victoria. The older woman's mask crumbled. She looked pathetic. So, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I own it all. Everything, Blackwood confirmed. You can evict them. You can cut their allowances. You can burn the house down if you wish. It is all yours. Sarah looked around the library. This was the moment of victory, the moment of revenge. She could kick them out into the rain, just like they had done to her. She could leave them with nothing. But then, Sarah looked at the diary in the box, her mother's diary. She remembered her mother's kindness. "I'm not going to kick you out," Sarah said quietly. Victoria let out a massive sigh of relief, slumping into the chair. "Oh, thank God. Thank you, Sarah. You're sensible." "However," Sarah continued, her eyes hardening, "things are going to change. Drastically." "Change how?" Chad asked warily. "We'll get to that," Sarah said. "But first, Mr. Blackwood, there's something else in this box. Something underneath the lining." Blackwood frowned. "I am not aware of anything else. Arthur only told me about the compass." Sarah ran her fingers along the velvet lining of the box bottom. She felt a lump. She pulled at a loose thread, and the false bottom lifted up. Hidden there was a photograph. It was black and white, old and creased. It showed Arthur Harrington as a young man, standing on a dock next to a woman who was not Sarah's mother, and they were holding a baby. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, was a name: Alexander. "Who is Alexander?" Sarah asked. The colour didn't just drain from Victoria's face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. She grabbed the arm of the chair, gasping for air. "No," Victoria whispered. "He said he got rid of him. He said the boy was gone." Blackwood looked genuinely shocked. He took the photo. "My God, I thought this was just a rumour." "What rumour?" Sarah demanded. "Who is Alexander?" "Alexander," Blackwood said slowly, looking at Chad, then at Victoria, "is Arthur's first son, the one he had before he met your mother, the one Victoria swore to keep secret in exchange for marriage." "He's alive?" Chad asked. "I have another brother." "If he is alive," Blackwood said, his legal mind racing, "and if he was never legally disowned, then under state law simply possessing the compass might not be enough. If a biological heir was omitted from a will due to fraud or concealment, they can lay claim to half the estate." Sarah looked at the photo, then at the terrified Victoria. The twists weren't over. The game had just expanded. "Where is he?" Sarah asked Victoria. "Where is Alexander?" Victoria was shaking. "I don't know. Arthur sent him away 40 years ago, to an orphanage in London. He's probably dead or in prison." "We need to find him," Sarah said firmly. "Why?" Chad screamed. "He'll take our money. Burn the photo, Sarah. Pretend you never found it." Sarah looked at the flame in the fireplace. It would be so easy. Just toss the photo in. Secure her billions. Secure her revenge. But she looked at the baby in the photo. An innocent child, cast aside just like she was. "No," Sarah said. She put the photo in her pocket. "Mr. Blackwood, hire a private investigator. We're going to London." "Sarah, you're making a mistake!" Victoria shrieked. "You're throwing it all away." "I'm finding my family," Sarah said. "The real family." While Sarah and Mr. Blackwood were boarding a first-class flight to London, a very different kind of meeting was taking place back at the Blackwood estate. The library, once a place of quiet dignity, now felt like a war room. Victoria was pacing frantically, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. Chad was slumped on the sofa, nursing his third whiskey. "Stop pacing, Mother, you're making me dizzy," Chad groaned. "You should be dizzy," Victoria snapped. "You should be terrified. If they find this Alexander, we lose half of everything. If he's vindictive, we lose it all. Sarah has the compass. She holds the purse strings. And now she's going to fetch a long-lost brother who probably hates us more than she does." Victoria stopped pacing. She pulled a burner phone from her purse, a habit she had picked up, during a brief, scandalous affair with a senator years ago. She dialed a number she hadn't used in a decade. "Who are you calling?" Chad asked, sitting up. "Insurance," Victoria hissed. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? It's Victoria. I need a job done in London." "I don't do that anymore, Mrs. Harrington. I'm retired." "Nobody retires from greed, Mr. Vane," she said coldly. "Double your usual rate. There are 2 Americans landing at Heathrow in 10 hours. A young woman and an old man. They are looking for someone. I need you to make sure they don't find him." "You want them removed?" "No," Victoria said quickly. She wasn't a murderer. At least she told herself she wasn't. "I want them scared. I want them to hit a dead end. Steal their luggage, intimidate them, give them false leads, and if they do find the target, make sure he doesn't want to talk to them." "And the target's name?" "Alexander. Last name unknown. He'd be about 42 years old. Likely in the system. Just stop them, Vane, by any means necessary." London was grey, cold, and smelled of diesel and damp concrete. For Sarah, it was overwhelming. She had never left the United States before. The sheer density of the city, the red double-decker buses, the rush of people, it was a far cry from the quiet solitude of her diner in Seattle. Mr. Blackwood, however, navigated the chaos with the ease of a man who had lived everywhere and nowhere. He hailed a black cab and gave the driver an address in Lambeth. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, clutching her bag tight. The compass was wrapped in a sock, buried deep inside. "St. Jude's Home for Boys," Blackwood said. That was the address in Arthur's private ledger. It's where the monthly support checks were sent until Alexander turned 18. He supported him? Financially? Never emotionally, Blackwood corrected. Arthur was a man of duty, not heart. He paid to keep the problem away. When the cab finally pulled up to the curb, Sarah's heart sank. St. Jude's was gone. The Victorian brick building had been demolished. In its place stood a gleaming, soulless block of luxury apartments called the Jude. "Well," Sarah sighed, "that's a dead end." "Not quite," Blackwood said, stepping out of the cab. "Institutions close, Sarah, but bureaucracies are eternal. The records had to go somewhere." It took them 2 days of tedious legwork. They visited the local council, the parish archives, and finally a dusty basement office of the Diocese of Suffolk. A clerk named Mrs. Higgins, who looked like she was made of dried parchment and tea, helped them. Harrington, Mrs. Higgins muttered, scrolling through microfiche on a machine that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Ah, here we are, 1983. Alexander Harrington, admitted age 4. Mother deceased, father listed as unknown. What happened to him?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. "He was a trouble case," Mrs. Higgins noted, adjusting her spectacles. "Ran away 6 times. Fights, truancy. At 16, he aged out early into independent living. But there's a note here from a social worker. Subject shows high aptitude for mechanics, but displays aggressive tendencies. Taken in by Mr. O'Malley at the East End docks for apprenticeship." "O'Malley," Blackwood noted the name. "Is he still there?" "O'Malley died years ago," Mrs. Higgins said. "But the garage is still there. It's in Whitechapel, or what's left of the old industrial bit." Sarah felt a shiver. Whitechapel. Jack the Ripper territory. "Let's go," Sarah said. They left the archives. As they stepped out onto the rainy street, a black sedan idled slowly past them. Sarah wouldn't have noticed it, but she saw the passenger window roll down an inch. A pair of eyes watched them, cold, calculating eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she whispered, "I think we're being followed." Blackwood didn't look around. He gripped his umbrella tighter. Walk, Sarah. Keep walking. Do not look back. They ducked into a crowded tube station. Blackwood moved with surprising speed for his age, weaving through the commuters. They jumped onto a train just as the doors were closing. Through the glass, Sarah saw two men in dark coats sprinting down the platform, cursing as the train pulled away. "Who are they?" Sarah asked, her breath hitching. "Friends of your stepmother, I suspect," Blackwood said grimly. "We are getting close. Victoria is afraid." "What if Alexander is dangerous?" Sarah asked. The report said he was aggressive. "He's a Harrington," Blackwood said. "We're all dangerous in our own way. You used a compass to steal an empire. Let's see what he uses." The garage was less of a repair shop and more of a fortress of scrap metal. Located under a railway arch in a gritty part of East London, it was surrounded by high chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The sign above the gate was rusted and barely legible. Sterling and Sons. Custom Ironworks. Sterling, Sarah mused. Like silver. A metal of value, but not gold, Blackwood observed. Poetic. It was dusk. The area was deserted, save for the occasional stray dog and the distant wail of sirens. The air smelled of welding ozone and stale beer. They approached the gate. A massive Rottweiler barked ferociously from the other side, throwing itself against the fence. "Nice doggy," Sarah murmured, stepping back. "Can I help you?" The voice was deep, gravelly, and carried a thick Cockney accent. But underneath the grit there was a familiar timbre, the same pitch as Arthur Harrington's voice. A man stepped out from the shadows of the workshop. He was wiping grease from his hands with a filthy rag. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing oil-stained coveralls. His head was shaved, and a scar ran through his left eyebrow. He looked like a man who had fought for everything he owned. "We're looking for Alexander," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man stopped wiping his hands. He looked them up and down. He saw Blackwood's expensive suit and Sarah's nervous stance. "Nobody calls me that," he said. "Name's Wolf. Wolf Sterling." "But you were Alexander," Blackwood said. "Alexander Harrington." The man's eyes narrowed. The temperature in the alley seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I don't know that name. You better leave. The dog gets hungry around this time." "We aren't here to cause trouble," Sarah said, stepping forward. She pulled the photo from her pocket, the one of Arthur holding the baby. She pushed it through the chain-link fence. "We're here because of this." Wolf stared at the photo. He didn't take it. He just looked at it, his jaw tightening. "Arthur is dead," Sarah said softly. Wolf didn't flinch. "Good. Hope it hurt." "I'm his daughter," Sarah continued. "Sarah." Wolf looked at her then, really looked at her. His eyes were startlingly blue. The Harrington eyes. He let out a short, harsh laugh. "So you're the replacement, the one he kept." "I was the disappointment," Sarah corrected him. "He treated me like furniture. He treated you like a secret. I think we have that in common." Wolf hesitated. He signaled to the dog, and the beast sat down instantly, silent. He unlocked the gate with a heavy clang. "Come in," he grunted. "Before you get mugged, you stick out like sore thumbs." The inside of the workshop was a chaotic masterpiece of metal. Motorcycles in various stages of repair, sculptures made of gears and pistons, and in the center, a beautiful, restored vintage Jaguar. Wolf led them to a small office in the back. It was cluttered but clean. He poured 3 mugs of tea from a kettle on a hot plate. "So," Wolf said, leaning back in a creaking chair. The old man kicked the bucket. "Why are you here? Looking for a kidney donor? Bone marrow?" "Because you won't get it from me." "We're here because he left you something," Blackwood said. I don't want his money, Wolf spat. I made my own way. I built this place from nothing. I don't need his charity. It's not charity, Sarah said. It's justice. And it's not just money. It's the company, the fleet, everything. Wolf laughed, a loud, barking sound. Me? Run a shipping empire. Look at me, love. I'm a grease monkey. I fix engines. I don't sit in boardrooms. You're the rightful heir, Blackwood said. Legally. Legally, I don't exist. Wolf slammed his hand on the desk. He erased me. Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing your father is one of the richest men in the world, and you're eating porridge in an orphanage? He visited me once, when I was 10. Sarah's eyes widened. He visited you? Yeah. He came in a big car, gave me a toy boat, told me that sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. Then he left. I smashed the boat. I swore I'd never be like him. He was a monster, Sarah agreed. But his wife, Victoria, she's worse. She wants it all. She tried to erase me, too. If we don't claim this, she wins. And I can't let her win. Not after what she did to us. Wolf looked at Sarah. He saw the fire in her eyes. It was the same fire he felt in his own gut. Victoria. Wolf muttered the name like a curse. She's the one who sent the men, isn't she? What men? Blackwood asked sharply. 2 blokes in a Rover. Been parked down the street for an hour. Watching the gate. Wolf stood up and walked to the window, peering through the blinds. I thought they were debt collectors, but if they're with her... They're cleaners, Blackwood said, his face pale. We need to leave. Now. Leave? Wolf smirked. He reached under his desk and pulled out a large wrench. This is my home. I don't run from my home. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. A Molotov cocktail crashed through the workshop window, exploding in a ball of fire against the far wall. They're burning us out! Sarah screamed. Get to the back! Wolf roared. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and blasted the flames, but the oil and grease in the shop were catching fast. The fire was spreading too quickly. Another bottle smashed through the skylight, the air filled with thick, black smoke. The back door! Wolf shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. He shoved her and Blackwood toward a heavy steel door at the rear of the shop. They burst out into the alleyway, coughing and sputtering. The rain was falling hard, hissing against the burning building. Blocking the alley were 3 men. They were big, wearing balaclavas and holding baseball bats. Mr. Vane sends his regards, the lead man said, slapping the bat into his palm. Sarah froze. Blackwood looked around for a weapon, but there was nothing. Wolf stepped in front of Sarah. He didn't look scared. He looked happy. He cracked his neck, then rolled his shoulders. You lads made a mistake, Wolf growled, his voice low and dangerous. You burned my jag. The fight that followed was brutal and short. Wolf didn't fight like a boxer. He fought like a survivor. He ducked a swing, head-butted the first man, and kicked the second one in the knee with a sickening crunch. The third man hesitated, seeing his friends on the ground. Wolf walked toward him. The man dropped his bat and ran. Wolf stood there, chest heaving, rain mixing with the soot on his face. He turned to Sarah. He looked terrifying. Okay, Wolf said, spitting blood onto the pavement. You convinced me. We did? Sarah asked, trembling. Yeah, Wolf wiped his mouth. I don't care about the money, but nobody burns my shop and gets away with it. I'm coming to Seattle. He looked at the burning building, then back at Sarah. We're going to take everything from them, Wolf vowed. Every last dime. Sarah looked at her half-brother. He wasn't the refined, educated partner she had expected. He was a weapon, and she had just pointed him at Victoria. Mr. Blackwood, Sarah said, a cold smile forming on her lips. "Book 3 tickets back." 2 days later, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in Seattle was a sea of black ties, designer gowns, and false sympathies. It was the annual Harrington Gala, an event Arthur had established 30 years ago to show off his philanthropy and his dominance. Victoria Harrington stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight that made her diamond necklace sparkle like ice. She looked radiant, having convinced herself that the silence from her cleaner in London meant the job was done. No news was good news. As far as she was concerned, Sarah was crying in a corner somewhere, and the brother was a non-issue. "Arthur was a visionary," Victoria said into the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "But even visionaries must rest. It has been a week of tragedy for our family. Yet, we must look to the future." She gestured to Chad, who stood beside her looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight. "Tonight, I am proud to announce that the board of directors, at my urging, has appointed Chad Harrington as the acting CEO of Harrington Shipping. We will carry on Arthur's legacy." The crowd applauded politely. They didn't respect Chad. Everyone knew he was a party boy. But they feared Victoria. "Thank you, Mother." Chad leaned into the mic, flashing a dazzling veneer-white smile. "I plan to take this company into the 21st century. We're going to cut the fat, maximize profits, and boom." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide with enough force to rattle the hinges. The applause died instantly. The orchestra stopped playing. 3 figures stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the lobby lights. In the center was Sarah. She was no longer wearing the thrift store parka. She wore a sharp, tailored black suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back, her face fierce. To her left was Mr. Blackwood, clutching his briefcase like a weapon. And to her right was a man the Seattle elite had never seen. He wore a tuxedo that strained against his broad shoulders. His head was shaved, a scar cut through his eyebrow, and he scanned the room not like a guest, but like a predator assessing a threat. Wolf Sterling. "I'm afraid," Sarah's voice rang out clear and loud across the silent room, "that appointment might be premature." Victoria gripped the podium, her knuckles turning white. "Security, get them out. They are crashing a private event." "We aren't crashing," Sarah said, walking down the center aisle. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea. "We own the building." Chad laughed nervously into the microphone. "Sarah, go home. You're embarrassing yourself. You got your box of trash. Let the adults talk." Wolf stopped walking. He looked up at the stage. "Is that him?" he asked Sarah, his voice low but audible to the front rows. "The one who thinks he's a man?" "That's him," Sarah said. Wolf grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. "Who is this brute?" Victoria shrieked. "Sarah, you brought your bodyguard? How tacky." They reached the foot of the stage. Sarah climbed the stairs, followed by Wolf and Blackwood. She took the microphone from a stunned Chad. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah said, addressing the room, "you were told my father had one son. You were lied to." She gestured to Wolf. "Meet Alexander Harrington, my father's firstborn, and the rightful owner of 51% of this company." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Whispers broke out like wildfire. "Alexander? The lost boy? Is it true?" Victoria laughed, but it sounded hysterical. "Lies! He's an imposter! A stray she picked up off the street to scam us. Look at him. He looks like a criminal." Wolf stepped forward. He took the microphone from Sarah. He didn't speak immediately. He just looked at Victoria. "I might look like a criminal, Victoria," Wolf rumbled, his voice rough with the accent of East London. "But at least I don't hire men to burn down buildings with people inside them." The room went deathly quiet. What? What are you talking about? Victoria stammered, stepping back. 2 nights ago, Wolf said, holding up his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up to the camera that was projecting the event onto the giant screens behind the stage. It was a video. Grainy, shaky footage taken in a rain-slicked alley. It showed a man zip-tied to a fence, battered and bruised. Voice on video. Wolf. Who sent you? Man on video. Vane. It was Vane. He said a woman in Seattle wanted the job done. Harrington. Mrs. Harrington. The crowd gasped. Phones were raised, recording everything. That's fake, Chad yelled. Deep fake. AI. Is it? Mr. Blackwood stepped forward. Because Scotland Yard arrested Mr. Vane 3 hours ago. He has provided a full confession and the bank transfer records linking the payment to a shell company owned by you, Victoria. Victoria's legs gave out. She collapsed against the podium. Chad looked around, realizing the ship was sinking, and tried to edge away. Going somewhere, brother? Wolf blocked Chad's path. Get out of my way, Chad sneered, trying to muster some courage. You're nothing. You're a mechanic. He shoved Wolf. It was like shoving a brick wall. Wolf didn't move. He simply grabbed Chad's wrist, twisted it effortlessly, and forced him to his knees in front of the entire Seattle elite. I am a mechanic, Wolf whispered in Chad's ear, and I'm here to fix what's broken. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel's grand ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over Seattle's elite. There were 300 guests, politicians, tech moguls and old money socialites, sipping champagne that cost more than a mortgage payment. At the center of it all stood Victoria Harrington. She looked triumphant, wearing a custom crimson gown that looked like a splash of blood against the white floral arrangements. She gripped the podium. She had spent the last 48 hours terrified, checking her phone every 5 minutes for news from London. But the silence had been her comfort. If they were alive, she reasoned, I would have heard. Arthur was a complicated man, Victoria said, her voice trembling with a rehearsed sorrow that brought a hush to the room. But he cared deeply for legacy, and while we mourn him, we must also look to the horizon. She gestured to her right, where Chad stood. He was sweating, his tuxedo collar tight around his neck, checking his reflection in a silver spoon. Tonight, Victoria announced, her voice rising, I am proud to introduce the new CEO of Harrington Shipping, my son, Chad Harrington. The applause was polite, tepid. Everyone knew Chad. They knew he had crashed a Ferrari into a fountain last year. They knew he was incompetent. But they also knew Victoria was ruthless, so they clapped. Thank you, Mother. Chad stepped up, flashing a veneer's white smile. I know I have big shoes to fill. But I plan to modernize. We're going to cut the dead weight and... Crash. The sound wasn't a door opening. It was a barrier being breached. The heavy double oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed against the walls with a violence that made the crystal glasses on the tables rattle. The orchestra screeched to a halt. 300 heads turned in unison. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the harsh lights of the hotel lobby, were 3 figures. To the left was Mr. Percival Blackwood, looking not like a dusty lawyer, but like an executioner in a 3-piece suit, clutching a briefcase. To the right was a man who looked like he had walked out of a nightmare. He wore a tuxedo that strained against his massive chest, his shaved head gleaming, a jagged scar running through his eyebrow. His presence sucked the air out of the room, and in the center was Sarah. She was unrecognizable. The frizzy hair was slicked back into a severe, elegant bun. The oversized coat was gone, replaced by a sharp, black power suit. She didn't look like the girl who ran a diner. She looked like the CEO she was born to be. I object, Sarah said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried like a gunshot. Security! Victoria shrieked, her composure shattering instantly. Get them out! These people are trespassing. We aren't trespassing, Victoria, Sarah said, beginning a slow, rhythmic walk down the center aisle. The crowd parted instantly, creating a wide berth for the trio. It's hard to trespass in a building I own, through the holding company, which I now control. Chad laughed nervously into the microphone. Sarah, is that you? God, you look terrible. Go home, sis. You got your box of junk. Don't make a scene. Wolf Sterling stopped walking. He looked up at the stage, his blue eyes locking onto Chad. That him? Wolf asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the chests of the people in the front row. The one who thinks he's the heir? That's him, Sarah confirmed. He looks soft, Wolf noted. Victoria gripped the podium, her knuckles white. Who is this thug? Sarah, have you lost your mind? Bringing a bodyguard to a black tie event. Sarah climbed the stairs to the stage. She took the microphone gently from Chad's hand. He was too stunned to resist. He's not a bodyguard, Sarah addressed the crowd, her voice steady. You all knew my father, Arthur Harrington. You knew him as a titan of industry. But you didn't know his secrets. She gestured to Wolf, who stepped up beside her. You were told Arthur had one son, Sarah said. You were lied to. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Alexander Harrington, my father's firstborn, the boy he abandoned, and the rightful owner of the Harrington Empire. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Phones were raised instantly, live streaming the moment. Lies! Victoria screamed, abandoning all pretense of grace. She lunged at Sarah but stopped when Wolf stepped between them. He's an imposter, a grifter she found in the gutter. Security! Arrest them! We have proof, Mr. Blackwood said, stepping up to the microphone. DNA tests, birth certificates, and the specific clause in Arthur's will regarding the Golden Compass. Whatever you think you have is fake, Chad yelled, trying to regain control. This is a hostile takeover. It's illegal. You want to talk about illegal? Wolf spoke for the first time into the mic. His accent was thick, rough, and undeniably East London. Let's talk about arson. Let's talk about attempted murder. Wolf pulled a tablet from his jacket. He tapped the screen, and the massive projection behind them, which had been displaying a photo of Arthur, flickered and changed. The video footage was dark and grainy, taken in a rainy London alleyway just 48 hours prior. It showed a man zip-tied to a chain-link fence, his face bruised. Wolf's voice, on video. I'm going to ask you once, who paid you to burn the shop? The man, on video. Vane, it was Vane. He said a woman in Seattle wanted the job done, no loose ends. She wired the money to the Cayman account. Wolf's voice. Which woman? The man. Harrington. Victoria Harrington. The video cut to black. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every eye turned to Victoria. It's AI, Victoria stammered, backing away. It's a deep fake. You can do anything with computers now. Mr. Vane didn't think it was a deep fake, Mr. Blackwood said coldly. He was arrested by Scotland Yard this morning. He gave them everything, Victoria. The texts, the wire transfer numbers, the audio recordings of your calls. Blackwood looked toward the side entrance of the ballroom. Officers! 6 Seattle police officers marched into the room. Victoria froze. Her world, the mansions, the galas, the reputation, dissolved in seconds. She looked at Chad. Do something! Chad looked at the police, then at his mother. Self-preservation kicked in. I didn't know, he shouted, throwing his hands up. She did it. I had nothing to do with it. I just wanted the car. You coward, Victoria hissed. As the officers cuffed Victoria, she began to scream, a primal, ugly sound. "I built this family. I kept his secrets. You ungrateful brats. You'll ruin the company." Chad tried to slip away during the commotion, edging toward the stairs. "Going somewhere?" Wolf blocked his path. "Get out of my way," Chad sneered, trying to summon the arrogance he had worn all his life. "You're just a grease monkey. You don't belong here." He shoved Wolf's chest. It was like shoving a granite statue. Wolf didn't budge. Instead, he reached out, grabbed Chad by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, and lifted him onto his tiptoes. "I am a mechanic," Wolf whispered, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "And I know exactly what to do with broken parts. I replace them." He released Chad, who crumbled to the floor, sobbing as an officer pulled him up and read him his rights as an accomplice. 2 hours later, the ballroom was empty. The guests had been cleared out, leaving only the debris of the party: half-eaten cake, overturned chairs, and the lingering scent of scandal. Sarah, Wolf, and Blackwood sat in the VIP green room backstage. "Well," Sarah said, kicking off her heels and slumping onto a velvet sofa, "we did it." "Bit dramatic for a Tuesday," Wolf grunted. He was tearing at his bow tie. "I hate these suits. I feel like a penguin in a straitjacket." Mr. Blackwood placed a thick leather binder on the coffee table. The drama served a legal purpose. The board witnessed everything. Victoria is removed for cause. The assets are frozen. The company is safe. He opened the binder. Now, the final matter. The trust, the compass, designated the heir. Technically, Wolf, the 51% controlling stake, the $4 billion, and the title of chairman belongs to you. Wolf looked at the papers. He looked at the zeros. It was enough money to buy countries. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden compass. He tossed it across the room. Sarah caught it instinctively. "I don't want it," Wolf said. Sarah blinked. "What?" "Wolf, it's billions. It's the fleet. It's everything." "I have a life," Wolf said, pouring himself a glass of water. "I have my shop. Well, I had a shop until your stepmother barbecued it. But I can rebuild. I like fixing things, Sarah. Engines make sense. People don't. I don't know the first thing about stocks or mergers." He looked at Sarah. The hardness in his eyes softened. "You knew the old man," Wolf said. "You stayed. You took the abuse for years and you didn't break. You're the one who figured out the riddle. You're the one who found me." "We did it together," Sarah argued. "Exactly," Wolf said. He pointed to the documents. "So we keep doing it together. 50-50. Mr. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "A joint partnership. It's highly unconventional for a conglomerate of this size." "We're an unconventional family," Wolf shrugged. "I'll handle the fleet. I'll go to the dry docks, check the crews, manage the logistics. I'll make sure the ships actually sail. Sarah handles the boardroom. She handles the sharks in suits." Sarah looked at the contract. She looked at her brother. The brother she hadn't known existed a week ago. "You really trust me with the money?" she asked. "You didn't sell the compass when you found it." Wolf smiled. "You came for me. That's enough." Sarah picked up a pen. "Partner." Wolf engulfed her hand in his calloused grip. "Partner." The rain in Seattle was still heavy, but inside the Harrington Tower, the atmosphere was bright. Sarah sat at the head of the massive boardroom table. The portrait of Arthur Harrington that used to loom over the room was gone. In its place was a large, gritty, black-and-white photograph of a shipyard at dawn, taken by Wolf. "Ms. Harrington?" The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "The board is concerned about the new expenditure, doubling the pension fund for the dock workers. It's aggressive. It's necessary, Sarah said, her voice cool and authoritative. We invest in our people. That is the new standard. But the profit margins. The boardroom door swung open. Wolf walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore dark jeans, heavy work boots, and a polo shirt with the company logo. He was wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Profit margins are up 18%, Wolf said, dropping a tablet onto the table. Because the engines aren't breaking down anymore. Because I fired the contractors who were using cheap parts. And because the crews are actually working instead of striking. He sat down next to Sarah, crossing his arms. The board members, terrified of him, nodded quickly. We agree, the CFO squeaked. Pension fund approved. Sarah smiled at her brother. He winked back. They were a perfect machine. The outcast daughter who understood the value of patience, and the lost son who understood the value of work. They hadn't just inherited an empire, they had reinvented it. And miles away, in a cold, grey cell at the Washington State Penitentiary, Victoria Harrington sat on a hard cot. She stared at the wall, realizing that she had made the one mistake Arthur Harrington never did. She underestimated the quiet ones, and that is how Sarah and Wolf turned a box of trash into a dynasty that ruled the seas. They proved that true legacy isn't about the money you are given. It's about the integrity you keep when the world turns its back on you. Victoria and Chad learned the hard way that you can burn down a building, but you can't burn down the truth. This story really makes you wonder. If you were in Sarah's shoes and you found a brother you never knew about, would you have split the $4 billion? Or would you have kept it all, reasoning that you were the one who suffered in that house for years? It's a tough choice. Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal, mystery, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.